Hello everyone. Our topic this week was requested by all of these lovely people. We'll be going over the Zerg from the StarCraft franchise. Spoilers for all things StarCraft. Let's do.
Okay, so the Zerg are one of the three playable races in the StarCraft verse, the other two being the Protoss, psionically and technologically advanced aliens, and the Terrans, sci-fi humans. The Zerg is a race of bestial creatures with a single overall directive: consume biomass, evolve, and become perfect. As a result, while the other two races are exceptionally technologically advanced, the Zerg are a completely biological species, making no use of technology whatsoever, instead forcing evolutionary modifications on themselves at alarmingly accelerated rates in order to adapt to whatever trials they need to overcome. The modern Zerg are the product of millennia of brutal and efficient select breeding, gene manipulation, and trial and error, resulting in organic creatures capable of traversing space and even utilizing a form of warp travel. Combat units with claws capable of shredding armor, launching spines, or spitting acids capable of piercing tank and ship hull plating, all while being wrapped in a hide tough enough to withstand anything from bullets to plasma discharges and ship-based weaponry, depending upon the particular Zerg unit in question. The Zerg are, individually, almost universally bestial, animalistic creatures with little higher brain function. However, Zerg strains also have numerous higher functioning units that act as some combination of intelligent actors and/or transmitters for such intelligence. The Zerg are controlled as a whole, first by the Overmind and later by the Queen of Blades, more on them later. When controlled, the Zerg are capable of working in cohesion and performing advanced tactical maneuvers. If lower-level Zerg are left without more intelligent commanders, however, they become feral, reduced to animals fending for their own survival.
This harkens back to their roots, as the Zerg species did not originally possess a leader figure or a hive mind, but were rather individual creatures just like virtually every other species in creation. The original, or primal, Zerg were largely stripped of their individuality by Amon millennia ago and transformed into the Zerg we think of today. Amon was a zel'naga. He was also the ultimate antagonist of the StarCraft primary game series and an enemy to literally all life. The Zel'naga were an ancient and absurdly powerful race. They literally create realities, universes, seed them with life, and then hibernate, waiting for their creations to find them. As part of the Zel'naga reproduction process, somewhere in the vastness of reality, the life that they seeded will eventually evolve into two races, one pure of form, the other pure of essence. Inevitably, over time, these two races will come together and arrive at the Zel'naga hideout. Once they've arrived, the Zel'naga will fuse the two races together, creating a new generation of Zel'naga, whereupon they create a new universe and start the process all over again. Amon was one of these Zel'naga, but he sought to put an end to the cycle, to see all other life destroyed and the endless creation of new realities put to rest. As such, when the Zel'naga created the StarCraft verse and laid down to sleep, Amon stayed awake and began traveling the stars, looking for creatures that had the potential to be the race's pure in essence and form that the Zel'naga needed, with the intent being to accelerate their evolution, combine them, and use them as an army to wage war on his brethren.
The first race Amon discovered and dubbed pure of form were the Protoss, who he began uplifting and accelerating in their growth, but whom he ultimately dubbed a failure after their society collapsed into civil war. For more information on Protoss, check out our video on them in the description and in the top right corner. Abandoning them, Amon eventually discovered the infant Zerg race on their homeworld. Though little more than larval creatures at the time, Amon saw their ability to multiply, adapt, consume, and absorb the essence of other creatures, and deemed them pure of essence. He uplifted the Zerg through similar methods and augmentations as he did with the Protoss. However, Amon considered one of his major failings with the Protoss to be that he allowed them to keep their free will, thus allowing for dissension and ego to fracture their people. To avoid this problem with the rapidly evolving Zerg, even Amon was impressed with their growth while he was tweaking them, Amon created the Overmind, a singular consciousness that grew in strength and might such that it was soon able to control the entirety of the swarm on the planet, managing the evolution of the species as new traits were absorbed and new challenges discovered. Eventually, the Zerg reached the pinnacle they could achieve while locked planetside, and psionically lured a race of spacefaring creatures to the planet, consumed them, and from them gained the ability to traverse space. This ended up being fortuitous timing for Amon, as it was around this time that the other Zel'naga became aware of his machinations and launched an attack upon he and his forces while they were in orbit over the Zerg homeworld. Previously hidden from the Zerg's attention, Amon revealed himself and, more importantly, his enemies to the Overmind's awareness, and the results were almost more than he could have hoped for. The Overmind was incredibly intelligent and had the freedom to think and plan and maneuver however he saw fit. However, Amon had implanted one overriding tenet into its being: consume all life and become perfect. So, when the Overmind saw these creatures in space, it launched the full force of the swarm against the Xel'naga in orbit, catching them by surprise and eradicating the vast majority of the Xel'naga's forces.
For his part, despite the Zerg's success, Amon was defeated by the other xel'naga. His corporeal form was destroyed and his consciousness was banished to the void, a sort of in-between space where the xel'naga are presumed to have come from in the first place, while the remaining xel'naga limped back to their hideout to sleep. In the aftermath, the Zerg devoured everything in orbit, and in doing so, the Overmind learned. Its power and knowledge increased exponentially as it was exposed to the knowledge of beings capable of creating a universe. Using the Xel'naga's great skill at genetic manipulation, the Overmind refined the Zerg's own capacity for adaptation and evolution. It also learned of the existence of the Protoss, beings pure in form, and knew that to fulfill its mandate, the Zerg would have to consume the Protoss in order to achieve perfection. The Overmind also knew that in fulfilling its mandate, the Zerg themselves would be destroyed to create Amon's new, perfect hybrids, but was unable to deviate from its course thanks to the unalterable drive to evolve woven into its very being. The Zerg swarm set out in search of the Protoss, only able to glean a vague idea of their location from the memories of the fallen Xel'naga, and the Overmind schemed for a way to use the cracks in Amon's control to free the Zerg swarm from its fate. The bulk of the Zerg began a decades-long trek across the stars in search of their spiritual cousins, the Protoss. Small remnants of the Zerg were left behind, which continued to evolve as they had before Amon's involvement, eventually securing their dominance on the planet while maintaining much greater individuality, though less overall biodiversity, than the Overmind's swarm.
As the swarm traveled the stars, they consumed any life with traits deemed desirable, adding and, when necessary, tweaking their strengths to increase the overall power and survivability of the Zerg. The swarm's numbers swelled so greatly that the Overmind began creating subsidiary intelligences so that the vast scope of the swarm would stay under its command, as it simply could no longer psychically reach far enough to control everything on its own. The greatest of these, the Overmind's generals, were the Cerebrits, controlling vast broods while just as bound to the Overmind's will as the Overmind was to its adapt, evolve, perfect edict. As they neared Protoss space, though, the Overmind became increasingly concerned. It knew the Protoss wielded significant psionic might, and despite its own abilities, the Zerg as a whole had little available to counter such power. It was for this reason that the Zerg began to consume humanity when they were first discovered. Though biologically the Terrans had little to offer, the species as a whole had significant psionic potential, and the Overmind sought their genetic material in an effort to build countermeasures against the Protoss's powers. For their part, the Protoss became aware of the Zerg's presence almost immediately upon their arrival in the region, and identified them as a xel'naga-influenced threat, subsequently sending armies to deal with the situation.
What followed was a three-sided bloodbath. As the Zerg tried to consume the Terrans, the Protoss tried to annihilate the Zerg with little heed to Terran casualties, the Terrans fought both sides with no idea of the larger issues at play, and the Zerg discovered that they couldn't actually consume the Protoss and evolve using their DNA. It would later be discovered by Amon's agents still loose in the galaxy that this setback could be synthetically overcome, but the Zerg themselves had no way to do so. Despite this, the Overmind's edict demanded that he destroy the Protoss. In the numerous ensuing encounters, the Zerg would eventually capture Kerrigan, a Terran psychic commando, and turn her into the Queen of Blades, a powerfully psionic Zerg with her original will and intelligence completely intact, but a new, warlike disposition and overall strength second only to the Overmind. With this new champion, the Overmind hoped to eventually save the Zerg from Amon's plans. As the wars continued, the Protoss found ways to permakill the Overmind Cerebrits, which were normally effectively immortal, and eventually the Overmind itself. They laid waste to the Overmind, though not before the Zerg had completely overrun the Protoss' home planet. After the Overmind's death, the swarm was split roughly in two, with one half serving one of the Overmind's last Cerebrits and the other serving Kerrigan. The Cerebrit gathered others of its ilk and fused together to create a new Overmind. Kerrigan opposed this, knowing that a new Overmind could once again override her will, so she manipulated both the Terrans and the Protoss into killing the budding Overmind and eventually the rest of the Cerebrits while she helped them fight their own wars, eventually solidifying her position as undisputed leader of the Swarm and making the Swarm arguably the greatest power in the sector.
In the following years, things quieted down. All parties retreated to lick their wounds and rebuild. In lieu of the Cerebrits, which required the Overmind to function long-term and which would always seek to reform the Overmind, Kerrigan developed the Zerg Queens to fulfill a similar role. the greatest functional difference between the queens and Cerebrits being that the queens could continue to function should Kerrigan die, and that they valued strength and power above all else. During this time of tense peace, Kerrigan became aware of the Xel'naga Ammon and his plans, already in motion to return and cleanse reality of life. Not seeing a way to win, but not going down without a fight, she threw the swarm into battle once more, which culminated in each of the three factions chasing down an ancient Xel'naga artifact, each for different reasons. Ultimately, the Terrans got it first and used it to return Kerrigan to a nearly human state, breaking her hold on the Zerg forces. With their leader gone, the swarm shattered, dispersing throughout the sector as the queens warred against themselves for supremacy, diminishing the overall threat of the Zerg, though not their lethality when encountered. A predominantly human Kerrigan worked with the Terrans for a time until her allies were captured and presumed slain. In response, she returned to the swarm, re-establishing her control of the Zerg step by step, traveling back to the Zerg's home planet to re-Zergify herself, in the process encountering the Primal Zerg, evolutionarily unique from the swarm and not subject to her neural control. However, they respected strength, so many followed when she left, having re-established her Queen of Blades status. Subsequently, Kerrigan saved her human allies, many of whom were not in fact dead, killed the leader of the Terran government, and then set off to confront Ammon's forces, arriving at the Xel'naga hideout in an effort to wake them as allies in the fight against Ammon. Ammon's synthetically created hybrid forces were entrenched there, however, and as such, the Zerg settled in for a long, hard fight, pushing through only when the Protoss arrived on a similar mission.
Kerrigan and the Protoss leader worked together to push through Ammon's forces, only to discover that the Xel'naga had already been killed and that Ammon had set a trap. A destructive portal leading to the Void was opened, threatening to consume both Zerg and Protoss forces. The Protoss worked on shutting down the portal, while the Zerg held the line against Ammon's hybrid, suffering the bulk of the casualties of the encounter. Afterward, the Zerg withdrew to rebuild their numbers, while the Protoss sought allies in preparation for a final assault upon Ammon and the Void. When they were ready, a joint force of Terrans, Protoss, and Zerg traveled into the Void and assaulted Ammon directly. There, the last remaining Xel'naga besides Ammon helped Kerrigan ascend to Xel'naga status at the cost of its own life, and then she spearheaded the joint attack on Ammon, slaying him permanently.
Afterward, she disappeared, leaving her primary queen, Zagara, in control of the swarm, having already gifted Zagara with greater intelligence and growth potential than a normal queen. In the years that followed, the three races came to an uneasy truce once more. Zagara, controlling the vast majority of the swarm, followed Kerrigan's endgame example, and using knowledge gifted to her by Kerrigan before her disappearance, used the Zerg's biomanipulation skill and Xel'naga essence to create creatures that could terraform planets, terraforming previously glassed planets into garden worlds, and attempting to work in peace with her neighbors. Small revolts occurred more than once within Zerg ranks during this time, but those within Zagara's influence were put down with traditional Zerg-like brutality. The only real harbinger of war left among the Zerg, providing nobody pokes the bee's nest, is another queen left alone and isolated by Kerrigan while she was still on the warpath, who continues to follow the last orders she received from the Queen of Blades: kill all of the Protoss.
And that's the story of the Zerg, evolutionary masters of the StarCraft franchise. We hope you enjoyed this video. If you did, please leave us a like and share it with someone you know might like it. If you have ideas for more videos in the future, do like all of these lovely people, and let us know in the comments down below. If you'd like to see more lore videos, go ahead and hit that subscribe button, and if you'd like to see our Let's Plays, hit the link in the description and subscribe to our Let's Play channel.
In the meantime, this has been
True Masters Morons,
signing off.